In this video, I'm going to talk briefly about ransomware, particularly for those people that are new to QRadar, and I'm going to also provide you a very simple way of improving your detection capabilities against this type of attacks. Why talking about ransomware? Well, not only bothers me that the bad guys are attacking hospitals when we need them most in this situation, but also the malice of the attackers has changed. Many people develop strategies for backups. So when they get hit for ransomware, they don't need to pay because they have backups to recover most of the data. But the bad guys have resorted to an evolution of the attack, saying, well, if you may recover your data, but I uploaded the data and I'm going to make it public, and there's going to be information that you don't want it to see public out there, so pay us. So that's bad. And also the fact that it used to be that phishing was mainly the vector for getting malware to start doing ransomware. Well, now RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, is being, and all remote desktop protocol has so many flaws and so many problems. But the problem is that right now, because people are working from home, they are using it most. So it's not properly secure, it's not properly configured, and it's being a vector for malware as well. As you well know, the main three sources for these are hashes, URLs, and IPs. And the IOCs are those three, because if you get some sources of hashes, you need three things for all these things. You need to have the sources of hashes, URLs, and IPs. For example, on hashes, you get Sysmon, you get your EDR technology, you get QNI if you have QNI installed that computes the hashes. And it's actually very good, because if you get those log sources and you get a hit on a hash, that's a sure thing. There's no false positive about it. In terms of URLs, of course, proxies, DNS, EDRs, and QNI also can provide you URLs. But it's a lot harder to check on URLs, and it's a lot more intensive in terms of computing resources, but it can be done as well. And the easiest one, but unfortunately the noisiest one, is IPs, where you can get all sorts of, in QRadar, you get sources of IP from even every flow that makes a connection, even if you don't have any logs for it. But once you have the problem with IPs, why are they so noisy? Well, because many of the attackers use cloud resources for doing their attacks. And then when they decommission or they get shut down, and if that IP that they use, that they rented basically, is used by a legitimate customer, then that's going to be flagged as being malicious. But nevertheless, if you have sources of hashes, URLs, and IPs, what you need are tables in QRadar called reference sets, and there's where the hint of today will go. You need to have tables that has that information about what are the bad hashes, what are the bad URLs, what are the bad IPs. So my rules can check on those and warn me when one of those are seen. So for that, there is a free app called the Threat Intelligence app, right? That requires a license. I'm using a trial license, and so can you. And if you like this, then you can get the full license. I believe that this trial license has some restrictions on the amount of things that you can download, but for a trial may serve you well. The first thing that you can actually do, for example, is a collection that the guys from the X-Force has done on this particular attack. We were seeing that thing in here. Notice that there are 2,261 IOCs, URLs, IPs. If I click here, see there are pages and pages on hashes. Well, how can I make that actionable? How can I leverage that? Well, two ways. One is simply by clicking, once you have a collection that you want, when you click scan now, what this thing does is goes into your QRadar system and execute one heck of a search. Let's actually click here to see the result. They may or may not have finished. Well, actually, it's only 8%. And it's actually taking those IOCs and looking in your logs and flows that can provide information about those IOCs if it sees something in there. And as expected in my demo system, I don't have any one of those attacks. This thing searches, you can see the details of the search. This search from actually today, October 31st. So from yesterday to today, so it's really 24 hours. So if you want to do more than that, well, you go ahead and standard curator, you make that search. So that is the first approach, right? The second thing that you can do is if you click on this icon in here, and I already did it because it takes a few minutes to update all this information. What this does is it makes API calls into the X-Force and gets, as you can see here, hashes, IP. These are IPv4s. You have URLs. There might be someone for hashes, etc. So I'm going to do one with IPs, which are the simplest one to play. So I already click on this button in here that does the download now, and there is also a free app in Curator called the data management, I believe it is called reference data management, which is an easier way of looking at not only reference sets but also reference map and stuff like that. So actually that's the table that I was playing with earlier. Has 839 IPs, but I believe that what I just saw was a different number, 980. And notice how frequently these things updates. So I'm actually going to, now there are 982. So the guys just updated this, and I just downloaded. Let me actually check to see if my table uploaded. And I'm going to tell you about a way of automating this so you don't have to do this manually. But for the first time, you may want to do it manually. And then I'll show you how you do a stick and taxi connection to have those things automated. Okay, so I refreshed the page, and now we had 982, which matches the 982 IP. So I'm current right now. Again, doing it manually the first time. So what this has done, it has provided us with a bunch of IPs that are malicious. So if anything gives you IPs, and one of them is in that table of 982, you will get an offense to fire. Now, no log sources and tables is good if you don't have the rules that are going to trigger on those things. And for that, the best friend that you have is the use case manager, right? And there is a package on the X4 Exchange called Ready for IBM Security Intelligence. I believe that this is what this stands for. And when you download that package, notice that in the test condition, in the search filters, I put RFISI. And I like that package. It's very old. It's not anything new. But it has all these different rules. Let me show you what is it that I did in my system to modify it in order to make it catch that. So the rules look something like this, right? Well, actually, it doesn't have this second part. Let me actually edit it in the editor, so you'll see what I mean. Let me click here. Let me actually remove this, which I added, and I'll show you how you do that and how you test that. So this is the way that this thing came, and it relies on an internal table called malware IPs that you can feed via stick and taxi, manually, whatever. But you need to say, well, I want you to also look into that table. So you simply click in here, and you get all the reference sets. You scroll to the bottom and go to the X4, the one that we just saw before. This one is malware IPv4, and you add that, you submit that, and now you have those two conditions, right? You need to make sure that this rule fires an offense. You need to have that check mark done, and of course that is enabled, right? And you'll see whether it's enabled or not from this particular view in here. See, it shows that it's actually enabled. In case that you haven't seen the use case manager, I have a whole set of videos. This is a fantastic app. You can actually see that now it's updated and say it works with these two table, and yeah, it's not related to any particular logs or type of custom property. So whatever gives me IPs that are bad, this is gonna trigger. Now let's actually how do you test this out? Let me show you what I did. Actually, from, in this particular case, is just an example from the blue code logs, and this is for URLs as well as for IPs. I took the logs, standard logs, only one line of log from that, and here this is one bad URL. But the important thing is that in here the IP address, where is the IP address? Oh, actually it was in front of me. It's right here. I actually replace what was in there with this IP, which is one. I took one from that table. I believe I took the first one. Yeah, that one I took it just to make sure that my rule was well and everything is working fine, right? So now the next thing for me to do is to replay, and again, this is a manual way of doing. You probably have better facilities for doing pen testing and doing other stuff, but I'm kind of a postman way of checking these things out. Now to replay this log using the undocumented internal tool in QRadar called log run, this is what I did. But even before doing that, let me show you that I have no offenses. I clear all my offenses, and I go to the log activity tab. Let me actually make sure that I go here in real time to see when the events actually come. So what I did is I invoked the log run. Again, this is not documented, but it's something that is there. The folks from IBM put it in the QRadar product. So it's OPT QRadar being log run, the file name, and that's where I have that log, right? And you can spoof the IP address if you want, and I'm going to run only one event per second. So when I hit enter, this thing generates that one event per second, and we should see it here in the log activity tab, and here it is, right? We can even pause it here, and that's the bad address that we saw. That's the IP. We can even see the same payload that we actually run, and we can even look here that the rules that match on it are this one. And forgive me for not using the new UI, but just the muscle memory that I have on the old one. So that is the rule that we actually modified. In fact, you can even click in here, and that will take you right there to it, right? Let's see if we got an offense that fire. We go to offenses. Let me refresh the screen. And bingo, we have an offense that fire on that single log. So we have tested. I can tell. I don't know why this failed from advisor. It's an automatic investigation, but advisor is actually searching. I'm not going to talk about advisor here in this video. But that is the way that you can simply, it's a kind of a push man. Even with a trial license, you can improve your posture into detecting, particularly if you work for a hospital, you can improve your protection against this type of malware campaigns. And there are many other protections and things. I'm not going to go into that. Now, the final point that I want to make is that way of doing it manually, even if you do it daily, it's a pain to have to do that manually. So the way to do that is using stick and taxi, and I did a separate video that shows that, in which you will set your curator assistant to go every hour, how often you want, into the X-Force, retrieve that list and put it into that reference set or any other that you may actually want to have. Again, this video is getting way too long. I hope that this helps you a bit to understand how to protect against those attacks. I'm not going to do, I was thinking on doing one on hashes, but it will be a little long because there are multiple hashes. There's SHA 256, SHA1, and also the custom property that struck the law can be called file hash, SHA1, MD5. So it will be a lot harder. So I just show it to you with IPs. If you also want to do that with hashes and even with URLs, you can easily do that. But remember that your best friend here is not only the threat intelligence app, but that use case manager app. So for example, if you want to play with URLs, let me actually clear all the filters. If you want to look for, hey, do I have any way of any rule that works with URL, you can even, and I have not scripted this, but I guess that is the test definition. Do I see anything that has to do with URLs? And apply that filter. And this is going to look into all the rules that I have, and yeah, and find a couple of those that have URL. Same thing with hash. But again, the hash can be file hash. It can be. This is more complicated because there's no standard way of actually reporting that. But as you can see, there are many of hash. So I hope that this helped you get your QRadar better prepared for detect instances of this malicious ransomware.